Ma tovu alecha Yaakov Mishkinosecha Yisrael Va'ani birov chasdecha Avo veisecha Eshtachave lecha kodshecha Ve'yirasecha.
Hello everyone, this is Mincha scenarios number 3, and today I'd like to explain the opinion that says you can daven Maariv at Shkia, which in essence means that you can't daven Mincha past Shkia. 100% legitimate, and anyone that davens in a Mincha Maariv that finishes Mincha before Shkia and davens Maariv right at Shkia should not feel guilty that they're davening quote-unquote early. And I'll explain what I mean. The Gemara in Brachos says you shouldn't daven too late into the day. Layit Allah b'Maarava, they used to curse in Israel, Aman dematzleim dim dumei chama, people that daven too late into the day when there's only a little specks of light left. My time, why would they curse such people? Dilma mitarif leishata. Explains Rashi, Amisha mishahet filata minchaim dim domei chama, someone that davens too late in the day, Shema titarif lo asha yedei ones vel varazman, because they're davening too late into the day, and they're going to miss the time to davening. So what is the time of mincha? What's the latest time you can daven? According to the Rabbanan, they said ad ha'erev. What does ha'erev mean? So we have actually an explicit Gemara in Masechet Zevachim that talks about the latest time you can throw the blood on the Mizbeach of the Korban Tamid Shel Ben HaArbaim, that famous sacrifice upon which Mincha is patterned. So the Gemara in Zevachim says, Minayin ladam shenifsar beshkiyat hachama. How do we know that you cannot throw the blood on the Mizbeach past sunset? And it brings a pasuk biyom Akrivo et zivcho ye acher. And indeed, the Rambam paskins, kol hakorbanot, all the korbanos, ein makrivin otam ela bayom, lefikach en sochatim ve'en zokin damim ela bayom. You can only do all the various work that has to go into the korban during the day. Vekevan sheshaka chama nifsal adam. And the minute the sun sets, you can no longer throw the blood on the mizbeach. It becomes puzzle, and there goes your korban. So, if indeed our mincha is patterned upon Tamid Shel Ben HaArbaim, and since the blood of the Tamid Shel Ben HaArbaim latest can be thrown on the Mizbeach at Shkia, it obviously lends itself to the fact that we can daven mincha past Shkia, which lends itself to we can daven Maariv the minute Shkia passes. And indeed, there's a slew of Rishonim and then Poskim that actually say this. The Tosfos says that Rabbeinu Tam had an ironclad rule throughout Shas, and that rule is that the word Shkia means what we call sunset, Dafka mashmat chilat Shkia. But when the Gemara says Mishetishka hachama, if it uses the words Mishetishka hachama, then it does not mean sunset, such as by Hanukkah candles, where it uses that term, but rather it means there mashma sof Shkia. And therefore, yesh lefaresh shkiyat hachama, hainu tchilat shkia, kodem tzeit hakochavim. So comes Tosfos and says it means what we call sunset. Perush Mishnah of the Rambam, he says that because we patterned mincha based on the Korban Tamid Shel Ben HaArbaim, mishen itpalel ad ha'erev, klomar ad shkiyat hashemesh, yatsa yedei tfilat mincha. The latest time you can daven mincha according to Rabbanan, ad ha'erev, means until evening. Evening means sunset, shkia. And the Rambam repeats this in Hilchos Tefillah, not yesh lo litpalel ota ad shetishka hachama. That's the latest time for mincha. Rabbeinu Yonah, in his Perush in the back of Masechet Brachot on the Reef, indeed says that ad ha'erev means not tzeit hakochavim, which would mean Laila, but rather ad shkiyat hachama, because of this Gemara in Zvachim. And not surprising, the Gra who says you should light Hanukkah candles at Shkia, in this Sugya, also passed in Shkia, but for a different reason. The Gra says, V'chein dam nifsal b'shkiyat hachama, because the Gemara says the last time you could do anything for the Korban Tamid Shel Ben HaArbaim is at Shkia. V'chein in litpalel minchas, from Shkia on, no mincha. Because of this Gemara in Zvachim, that both the Tosfot, the Rambam, and Rabbeinu Yonah all said, hey, that's the latest time to daven, sunset. It's not surprising that the Shulchan Aruch says that if you choose to do like the Rabbanan, and you want to daven ad halayla, the words ad halayla, which in the Gemara was ad ha'erev, means, according to the Shulchan Aruch, and I quote his words, ve'achshav shenahagu litpalel tfilat mincha ad halayla, ein litpalel tfilat arvit kodem shkiyat hachama. So says the Shulchan Aruch that because most people daven mincha like Rabbanan, which means ad halayla, that means, in this context, until shkia, which means you can daven Maariv at Shkia. I quote again from the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law, and lihitpalel tfilat arvit kodem shkiyat hachama. So if you're in a minyan, not a plug minyan, but a Rabbanan minyan, and they daven in accordance with the opinion of ad ha'erev, it means until Shkia mincha, right after Shkia, you can daven Maariv. The Mishnah Brura, the Chafetz Chaim, actually likes this view. When he sees the words ad halayla in the Shulchan Aruch, and he was worried that you're not going to read a few lines later, he came along and said right there and then that the words ad halayla does not mean until night, but rather ratzalomar ad bein hashmashot, until twilight. Twilight begins a second after Shkia. Mincha hu rak kodem shkia tachama, v'lachein lechatchila tzarich kol adam lizaher litpalel kodem shkia tachama. And indeed, mincha is up until shkia, and lechatchila, that should be the time that you should finish mincha by shkia. And he goes on to say that if there's a minyan that davens after shkia, it's better in his opinion, ad kedei kach, lihitpalel bizmana b'yechidut militpalel achar kach b'tzibur. So, as you could see, there is not only a slew of Rishonim that say the latest time you can daven mincha is Shkia, and only till Shkia, not past. Obviously, it lends itself that the minute mincha passes, you can daven Maariv. Is it a good idea to repeat Kriyat Shema when it gets dark? Yes, it's a mitzvah d'oraisa. Why not be machmir for the other opinion? But impossible to say, wrong to say, that whoever davens Maariv at Shkia is doing bedi'eved, because the Shulchan Aruch was the one that said to actually do it. So to sum up, the Gemara in Zvachim says the latest time you can do anything for the evening sacrifice upon which the mincha service has been patterned is Shkia. And we have a slew of Rishonim that say that means what we call sunset. And as such, mincha till sunset, if you go in accordance with the Rabbanan, and Maariv a second after sunset. I want to end with two stories about Rav Soloveitchik, who was very makbid on this. Rav Hershel Shech to bring this in Nefesh Harav, and Rabbeinu Hayam Tamid Mendakdek Lihitpalel Mincha Kodem Hashkia, and he would quote this Rabbeinu Yonah that we mentioned earlier. Later on, in a publication of YU called Beit Yitzchak, Tafshin Pei Gimel, the Choveret is Choveret number Nun, and it's on page 12. He talks about a Rebbe I never heard of, the Dumbervenover Rebbe, that used to have a shtibel in Berlin during the years that Rav Soloveitchik learned there in the university, and he used to daven there, and he would say that ultimately on Shabbos afternoon, which would be a time that maybe you could be more makel, since Shabbos goes, as we know, until darkness, and maybe you could say maybe Mincha goes until darkness, he would see that they wouldn't finish Mincha before Shkia. He himself would be very medakdek to finish before Shkia. Why? Because of this Rabbeinu Yonah, because of this Gemara in Zvachim. So indeed, to sum up, there is a Gemara in Zvachim that says the latest time you can do anything with the Korban Tamid Shel Ben Arabayim, upon which we pattern Mincha, is Shkia. There's a slew of Rishonim that say that means sunset, and therefore the latest time you can daven Mincha in accordance with Rabbanan, Ad Ha'erev, means sunset, which means the earliest time you can daven Maariv is sunset as well. And it's not bedi'eved, it's lechatchila. It's exactly what the Shulchan Aruch tells you to do.
Torah kehilas Yaakov, Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Torah kehilas Yaakov, Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Torah kehilas Yaakov, Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Torah kehilas Yaakov.